Hey, so last week I was looking at magic items and minor arcana in particular, and I mentioned how they can't resolve the conflict of the story itself. And one of the examples of minor arcana are lightsabers. And so today we're going to do a case study on why you can't use lightsabers, to resolve your conflict, which seems kind of counterintuitive since, all resolutions in stories are usually done through violence, and nothing's really more violent than a lightsaber. Violence is winning, and everything is why we have finales. It's also kind of weird and counterintuitive because Luke is the quintessential farm boy with a magic sword. He goes out to win with his magic sword, and a lot of it's a trope for a reason. But the thing is, you can't actually use it. You can't use your magic weapon. You can't sword harder or gun harder, which is going to make sense in a little bit. You can't use the minor arcana to resolve your conflict. Hi, I'm Matt, and once a week I break down world building techniques, tricks, and tips. But today we are going to look at Star Wars, lightsabers, and how conflict cannot be resolved by them. Okay, as I said last week, I did magic items, and one of them, of the four types, is minor arcana. Go look it up if you have a few minutes. This will make a lot more sense. But really, the takeaway from that is that minor arcana are kind of magic items that they're very tools or weapon-esque. They usually become emblems of whoever's using them, i.e. lightsabers or wands. I'm not going to pick mine up, even though I did reach for it. Basically they can't resolve the conflict, and if they do, it feels, it's just not great. And we're going to explain why. Part of this goes to my copy editor. He used to work for me as reviewing screenplays, and nothing annoyed him more than if the character just got stronger from the finale and was just better. It just irritated him to no end because he understood that you need to show growth or cleverness in your finale. This is a caveat. One of the caveats, the first, is that this is for Western stories, as in Western civilization. I forgot what but there's a term for the Eastern plot structure, and I can't remember it right now, but anyways. So what we're looking at today about magic weapons not resolving the conflict, those are for a specific type, minor arcana, and in Western stories. And one of the things that we're going to look at as we do this is how guns resolve stories in Western stories. And it's going to seem kind of weird, but actually when you think about it, guns are the perfect minor arcana, especially as they're used in movies. They're really kind of like a point and click interface. I point it at you, bad guy. The hero points it at a bad guy. It's one shot kill. Hero can get hit a couple times, but just kind of rolled off. But their gun always kills, never runs out of ammo unless there's another gun you can grab John Wick style from someone else and keep using it, or you have another one quickly at the ready, or it's in the finale when you will invariably run out of bullets and you have to face the villain one-on-one, mano-a-mano, fists. And part of the reason for this is, one, films are visual, so it is much more visceral, much more compelling to watch someone beat the snot out of someone than to shoot them from, far away. If you shoot them from there, So, there are exceptions to it, obviously, but, Tombstone, one of my personal favorites, where, it is resolved with a gun. But usually it is not. Predator, really fetishized the guns at the time. That's where we learned about miniguns. How does it resolve? By having to, one-on-one fight this creature with his, fists and cleverness, and using the terrain against him. Aliens, same sort of thing. It comes down, starts off with all these big cool guns, and by the end of it, she's in a suit, whack, whack, whack. RoboCop, same thing. He's got this big gun, and how does he end it? With, the knife. And you can resolve with guns, but much like minor arcana, as I mentioned, you have to use it outside of its normal use. You have to be clever, you have to show some growth. For instance, Die Hard, the quintessential one, how does he resolves it with the gun, but it's because he cleverly hid the gun, and, ha 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 ha, it was that moment right there. Heat, another movie that guns feature, very prominently, and then resolved it. But it wasn't about using the gun; it was about using the surrounding and the shadow. Grosse Point Blank, another example of he was actually bartering for a gun, and when the gun was thrown to him, used it as a bait for the own trap to resolve it. So character kind of moments, cleverness, that kind of thing. Same holds true for swords and movies that feature swords. Rob Roy is a really great one where you just anyways, you should see that one. Princess Bride is kind of interesting too, because you have Inigo Montoya, it becomes a character moment where he, even though he is beaten, he is still able to force of will his way through. More of a counterexample, but Wesley, great swordsman, the equal swordsman, he bluffs his way out. So again, not resolved with the weapon, not when it's a minor weapon like that. If you've spent the whole movie trying to get the weapon, and then you get it, and then that's fine because you've earned it. But for the minor arcana, anyways, go watch the old video, the one from last week. All right, and part of the reason is that you can't resolve it with the minor arcana is because the hero needs to be an underdog against a more powerful villain. The hero needs to take the lessons they learned in the second act to defeat the bad guy from the first act, resolve the problems from the first act. Things with minor arcana is they're usually received in the first act. Let's look at Luke Skywalker gets his lightsaber at the end of the first act, right before he leaves the planet, that kind of thing. That's why the magical swords, the same with Harry Potter, gets his wand very early on, so that's why he doesn't use the wand to do it. So today we're going to do that, after that very long introduction, we are going to look at Obi-Wan, Vader, Luke, Vader in the first trilogy, and then the prequel trilogy, and then completely ignore the sequel trilogy, mainly because it's terrible and I don't want to rewatch it, even if it does make my point. I'm going to stick to the major films with one slight caveat at the end, mainly because the films are more canonical. So, and the other thing is I really wanted to pull clips for this, but it is beyond my ability and time, so I'm just going to look at pictures and use your memory. Chances are if you're watching a world building video, you can remember most of the Star Wars trilogies. So let's start with Star Wars and the original, New Hope, and it is not resolved with the magic weapon. It is not resolved with the sword. It is resolved when they blow up the Death Star, the last, which is the last fight. And that's the important one, because we'll come back to that, because the last fight in the finale is the most important one, since it is the one that resolves everything. Lightsabers are more like broadswords in it, and and when you see Obi-Wan in fights with it, it's kind of awkward. And also, it happens 2/3 of the way through the movie. It happens where the mentor dies at the dark night of the soul, because that's what happens, in the story. And then you don't see a lightsaber again. That is the last time you think you see the lightsaber in the original one. And also suddenly, Vader says, I was but the learner, which is proof that they had not come up with the term Padawan, which now is, part of regular vernacular. Anyways, so takeaways from that. Big swords, like they were, as if they were really heavy, and did not resolve the conflict. The fight there was about the characters, was about Obi-Wan giving up, and basically it needed a point where the mentor died. So mentor dies, lets Vader strike him down. All right, so Empire. There are two parallel finales going on at the same time. Vader is fighting Luke, and then the rest of the team is escaping Cloud City, i.e. trying to get trying to get Han back. There's a lot more fighting with this one, and it is resolved with the sword fight. There are, still very big weapons, much big more fight. Vader actually uses the Force and stuff in it. Really kind of cool fight, but it's not about the fight itself. The fight was, like two guys who barely know how to use swords, kind of, but it was really more about the big emotions. We have the big reveal. We have, Luke learns about his parentage. I'm trying to not spoiler this 40-year-old movie. I don't know why. Anyways, big emotions, big reveals, and Luke loses. But oddly enough, that has no effect on the other plot. They still get away from Cloud City, even though Luke, that had nothing to do with it. But the lightsaber fight is the last fight in there. It is the thing that resolves the conflict of the story. Thing is, though, it was a loss. So Vader wins with it. The lightsaber does resolve it, but it was the villain who resolved it. And, which is kind of the series of down endings, which is why Empire is the best of all those, to quote from Clerks, which you should also go watch. And this series of down endings is also kind of important for the Clone Wars. We'll get to in a second. All right, Jedi. We now have 3 parallel finales happening at the same time. Luke fighting Vader, the Starfighters trying to destroy the Death Star, and then on Endor, Han and the rest of them trying to blow it up. It is interesting that because Luke, again, is parallel. He's off on the side. Han destroying the generator is going to save all the people up there, which the Emperor is using to annoy Luke, but, Luke is not in this equation at all. The lightsaber battle is not a part of the blowing up the Death Star. And oddly enough, Luke is not the last one in it. He defeats Vader before they blow up the Death Star. Question is, why? And, first, logistics, they can't blow up the Death Star if Luke's on it. And second, because Luke's story isn't the most important. The through line of the original trilogy is the fall of the Empire. And we know that because Luke becoming a Jedi is just a small subplot of the Empire being destroyed. The story in that one is not decided by swords. Is not decided by the minor arcana. It is big emotions, again, just like the other one, and it's about these character moments and Vader's arc being completed, and so really about emotions, not about sword fighting. Flash forward 20 years. Now we are in the 90s, late 90s. I remember because I remember where I was when it came out and that kind of thing. And Lucas is back at it and he's making his prequels. And I have to say the lightsaber combat is incredibly better. It is so much more fun to watch, so more dynamic, active, visceral, really, really cool. They're not broadswords anymore. They're like rapiers. They're fast and, but then the importance shifts. I think that Lucas has lost at this point the idea of what it was important about Star Wars, what were the great things about it, and it's made it all about Jedis and the sword fighting. And honestly, he can kind of be forgiven for that because I'm the first generation that now cannot hold a cardboard tube without making lightsaber sounds as an adult, and I know I'm not the only one. Lightsabers are cool. They were iconic, but the shift in the story happened where everything started being resolved by lightsabers, and that started with the Phantom Menace. This one's interesting. There are now 4 parallel, finale plot lines going, subplots. You have your lightsaber battle between the Jedis and Darth Maul. You have Padme trying to get into the throne room to capture the vaguely racist aliens. Not so vaguely racist. Anyways, you have Anakin blowing up the inside, just pretty much directly from Death Star 101, and then you also have the surface battle between the Gungans and the clones. And, some of them are tangent, again, the lightsaber battle is off on its own. If they win or lose that one, doesn't matter. Anakin's still going to blow this up. It's going to make the clones stop working. The ground battle is going to win, and they're going to capture the, whatever they were, Mercantile Banking Guild? Anyways, so yeah. So again, sabers are tangential to this, but it's more important in terms of storytelling to Lucas because it is the final battle in all of that finale. It is the thing that ends the finale. So to him, the lightsabers were really, really important in this. But the finale doesn't make sense. It doesn't emotionally work as well. Qui-Gon's killed and Obi-Wan wins against Maul. But why? I remember even thinking at the time, what did that accomplish for Obi-Wan? Why was he suddenly better? His mentor is taken down, this guy is, and he's a Padawan, and, boom, he still beats Maul. Why? What character growth was there? What was that? And if you have an answer for me after 20 years, I haven't figured it out, other than they needed it for the story. They needed a reason, and that Obi-Wan was going to teach Anakin. And this is what we call the problem of the prequels, where you just are putting things in to explain things that have already happened in the story, rather than building a unique and enjoyable story. Obi-Wan needed to win, so he wins. He just swords harder. He just lightsabers harder than Maul, who is the best and is shown how good he is, but suddenly Obi-Wan. Can't explain it. Not really character growth. Anyways, it wasn't even clever. It wasn't him using the lightsaber in a special way. It was just him being better. All right, Attack the Clones. I think some of the excess of Lucas is come off, and then there's only 2 parallel, final battles, and they're not even I guess they're parallel. There's the battle for the planet. The clones have shown up after the big, battle of Jedis versus creatures versus robots versus clones that come in. It's a big thing. But then, now they're fighting for the surface of the planet, and then we have not one, but two lightsaber duels. First one, is kind of weird. It's Dooku and Anakin and Obi-Wan, and it's really kind of perfunctory, I have to say. There's no emotion there. No one cares about anyone. This isn't Luke fighting his father or Vader fighting his mentor. This is this guy who's like, well, Obi-Wan, my Yoda was also my mentor, and like, are they trying to build an emotional connection? Like, the only time they've ever interacted was when Dooku had him captured. Like, they don't know each other. It's just, fighting out. None of this big emotion that they're having. Also, loved me some Christopher Lee? Hey, Lee. Anyways, but he's an old dude, and it showed. It showed, rule of thumb, don't have a septuagenarian, in your fights, in your final battle scene. But wait, let's make the bad guy he fights even older. Suddenly, Yoda shows up, and after, Anakin and Obi-Wan have been defeated, and then, now a battle between an 800-year-old lizard creature and a really old man. And, it was a huge deal at the time. I remember people were like, oh my God, you see Yoda with a lightsaber, this is the biggest thing ever. Everyone was talking about it, but it didn't have any gravitas. It didn't have any emotion. Like, finally, this, Yoda versus his mentor, or his mentee, and there's supposed to be emotion there, but it wasn't. It was just a little thing jumping around, and I didn't even really afraid that Yoda was going to die, because we obviously see him later. Problem with the prequels. So there was no gravitas. It was supposed to be cool. Sanderson's rule of four, the fourth rule, like err on the side of cool. But it was just silly. It was just a silly thing that ended the episode. So it wasn't even the main characters. It was Yoda versus Dooku, and then it's just a draw, and they just leave. Don't resolve your story with the magic sabers, magic weapons. So I think they were aiming for a down ending, kind of like Empire, but it was hard to tell. There's no big reveal, like, other than, the plans of the Death Star. Like, yeah, we know, problem with the prequel, and we know that happens, So again, they were trying to end it on a cool thing, the cool thing being Yoda with a lightsaber. It just didn't have the emotional punch, didn't have it, as the really big, awkward lightsabers of the first ones. All right. Revenge of the Sith. Back to two parallel saber battles, or two more saber battles, and they were parallel, I'm sorry. But the funny thing is, you have the big one between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and then you have Yoda versus Palpatine, which I didn't even remember. I mean, it's been a while since I've read it, or watched it, but not too many years, and I totally forgot that Yoda fights Palpatine. But why? Why was this important? Like, again, no big emotions between them. It's not like they were best friends, or, Palpatine had been playing them. It was just two old dudes that kind of know each other, and, Palpatine's killed Mace, and I don't know, it's just swinging sabers, and didn't really care. But that was this kind of secondary one. The important one, Obi-Wan versus Anakin. They spent 3 movies building this up, and it goes on for a long time. And to their credit, there is big emotions in this. There are big swings. It's not just the pretty that you're seeing in the first 2 movies. I mean, they pull out all the set pieces. There's a point where, like, he's on a crane in lava as it's floating, and they're jumping around, and it was very pretty, very interesting. I have to give them credit for that. But it should, they've been building to it, and then it just sort of ends. And it ends with this jump, and this much maligned and much memed, like, I have the higher ground. And that doesn't work. It really doesn't work. All these years later, we still make fun of it because it didn't build it up. If that was not a callback to something, you never actually saw him show the lesson of the higher ground. I think it was supposed to be, I have the moral high ground, but again, not really set up. It was kind of laughable. And the reason it didn't work, and this comes back to it again, is because Obi-Wan didn't do anything clever. He just used his lightsaber better than Anakin. And that showed he was not the underdog. Anakin is the underdog in this because he's the younger one, he's the weaker one, and Obi-Wan is the older one and always been the master. So he just swords harder. He does the thing that should be expected from the beginning, of that the stronger character wins the fight. Doesn't do anything clever, just ends it. Just uses his magic weapon that he's had from the beginning to defeat the other guy who had the same magic weapon from the beginning without anything clever. again, this is kind of the problem with the prequels, of that we just needed it to happen. And we just needed Obi-Wan to defeat Anakin, have Anakin become Vader, lose some limbs along the way. And so they didn't work for it. They didn't put in the effort, they didn't do the legwork, they didn't build up all these emotions and payoffs and stuff because, well, it's like driving from point A to point B and just go the fastest route. You can compare this to the Obi-Wan show, which was, I won't say it's terrible, but again, Obi-Wan versus Vader doesn't end the story. It's the other one not killing Luke that ends it. And why does that make sense at all? I mean, obviously Luke's going to survive, problem with the prequels, but it was a big character moment. You see Obi-Wan overcoming his self-doubt so that he can sword harder, and then leaves Vader to live, because that doesn't make any sense for the characters. He should have reason to kill Anakin. He knows that Anakin's killed all these kids now and done these horrible things. But again, problem with the prequels, we need to, and move on to the Inquisitor story. The character moment, but yeah. Anyways, so there is one caveat, and I'm going to put it at the very, very end of all of this. There is a time that a lightsaber battle does successfully resolve the conflict of the story of an entire season of Mandalorian, in fact. Stick around to the very, very end after the credits, and you'll see. Hey, it's 24 hours later, and I have to redo my finale real quick. To recap, just the original trilogy, lightsabers, big, awkward, not really flashy like they were in this prequels, but what they were, it was actually a very small part of the story. These magical items did not drive the action. They were just a small part of the subplot. They were just a little bit of the world itself. The world made it cool, but the finale was all about the character moments and the plot and it all coming together. The Jedis were just a subplot of, the whole fall of the Empire in the original trilogy. Flash forward to the prequels 20 years later, and we kind of got lost in it that the lightsabers were the cool thing. Lightsabers are the reason people wanted to go to this world, and they were the purpose of the story along with the Jedi. So instead of there being a self-contained story, which kind of the Anakin thing, instead of being a big character moment, it kind of got lost, and it was all about the lightsabers, all about the Jedi and the combat. So in the original trilogy, only Empire was resolved with logic, with the magical items, the lightsabers, and even then, the heroes lost, and so nothing was resolved with the lightsabers. It was only continued. Opposed to the prequels, where all of a sudden lightsabers are fast, they're flashy. Everyone thinks that this is the reason that or Lucas thinks this is the reason people want to see Star Wars, is because of all the lightsabers and stuff. And you don't have just one movie resolved with lightsabers. You have all three of them, and there's multiple lightsaber battles, but the thing is, there's no real emotion. It isn't about characters anymore. There's only one of the 5, I think, lightsaber battles that there's any actual emotion built up between the characters of Obi-Wan and Anakin. The reason we've sat here for 3 movies. So yeah, just to recap really quick, the point of all of this, minor arcana, the reason they don't solve the problem is you've had them the whole time. Everyone's kind of had them, not everyone, but like the wands in Harry Potter or the lightsabers, both sides have had them. They've had them since the beginning of it. So it can't resolve the story because, the minor arcana are just kind of not background, they're not like window dressing, but they make the story cooler, but they're not the point of the story. And I think that's what this case study of lightsabers in Star Wars prequels and the originals and the prequels is so important, because because magic items need to be a part of the story. They make the story cooler, but they're not the point of the story. So please keep that in mind with your magical items. The story should be focused on, a balance between the plot, the world, and the characters, instead of just being one of them. Because when it's just one of them, i.e. the prequels, it all gets all a balance, and you get lost in it. So there you go, a very long version of why you can't use your magical weapons, including guns, to resolve your conflict. I hope that helps, and I hope you can use it to build some better worlds. So as I said, there is one example, one counterintuitive example of when a lightsaber is used properly, and this is the spoiler for end of season of Mandalorian, which I'm sure you've seen anyways, and that's when Luke shows up, and he comes in and he lightsabers, and when I went back to look at it, I still got chills watching it. It was really, really cool, even though he sworded really hard and saved everyone. And that's why they could get away with it, because it wasn't the main characters who were sorting harder. It was Luke coming in. but it wasn't Deus Ex Machina, and it works the same reason it wasn't Deus Ex Machina, for the same reason that when Gandalf rides in at the end of the third day, and wherever it is that it wasn't Helm's Deep, wherever it is that I forgot to look up, or when the adults and Dumbledore show up to save the kids at Order of the Phoenix or whatever, it works for the same reason of all of those. It isn't the main character doing it, but it is the characters themselves that have sacrificed and have willing to recommitted themselves to whatever it is, keeping, Baby Yoda safe. Saving Private Ryan is another great example of, it's not a Deus Ex Machina because they sacrificed so much and spent so much time and recommitted themselves to their goal. And just by holding out, it is an earned win because they have sacrificed so much. So there you go. Lightsaber can resolve it, just not the main character's lightsaber. Luke for the win.